storytelling. In this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure.
Well, you're in for a treat this week. This week I speak with South Australian Indigenous elder Ken Jones. Ken shares his experience with working with the land and on the land in the south part of South Australia, and shares a lot of history about the area, the work that he does, and at the very end we have a little conversation about whether it's okay or not to tell Aboriginal stories. I encourage you to stay to the end and listen to the wisdom of this wise one. Here's Ken. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Ken Jones, who comes from South Australia and lives on the Limestone Coast of South Australia, which is right down the bottom. Welcome to the podcast, Ken.
G'day. Glad to be on board.
I'd love to hear about your journey into storytelling. How did you start spinning yarns and doing things like that?
Long time ago. A lot of my stories start long time ago, and my sister and a lot of friends say, what a wonderful way to connect people, because a long time ago is so special for us blackfellas. Our Indigenous storytelling is very ancient and very meaningful. So to go back a little bit, our Boandik Country apparently was settled a long time ago. And with the intrusion or the settlement of farmers and agriculturalists, it changed so much. There've been a lot of changes in our country. So I guess I picked up storytelling as a way to enlighten and help people understand a bit more about why we are still here. Over.
So was it something that you fell into, or was it something that you did as a child, or did your family tell stories? How did it work for you?
Yeah, our family's always been great inclusive storytellers. They would sit around the campfire or inside in front of the open fire. We had a blessed upbringing, quite a pleasant family, mum and dad, and had 4 brothers and sisters. They were a bit older than me, most of them, but I was the lucky one. I was the second part of our family. So we were a bit spoilt. Our parents were older and they had the experience, I guess, of how to bring up kids in a pleasant manner that wasn't quite so much blood, sweat and tears about poor old dad trying to earn a quid. So I was blessed to be with my dad. I was probably 4 when I first went with him on the butcher round. He used to be a butcher. And I remember so many lovely times being with my dad. And one of the funny memories was the ABC music on the hour of the ABC news. And Dad always had a thermos of black sweet tea, or when we called into some of Dad's favourite clients, they'd invite us in and we'd listen to their stories too, and we'd hear about their peasant life. I think as a commonality with a lot of good storytellers, they're not particularly the wealthy ones that have got everything. They're usually the ones that have had blood, sweat and tears and really battled. They're the ones that have the best stories. And I remember old Mrs. Marnie with her beautiful white scrub pine table, and she told us the stories about the plum tree and how she would make the cream for the bread and the plum jam and cream that we would have for morning tea. And we always try to work it. We'd be there at her place about 11 o'clock. So stories came from the poor people. They came from our own family, my aunties and uncles. I never really got to know my grandparents because they all died young. However, this is the beauty of storytelling. Their stories continued through generations, just like our blackfella stories. They continued through many hundreds of generations. And I think as a struggling student, I was good at English, bloody hopeless at maths, good at woodwork and stuff like that, because my dad had taught me boat building and bending wood with steam and stuff like that. So I think our survival in our family being not particularly academic or not particularly good at the sciences and the maths, we lent upon our language, our Boandik language. And my mum was, they all left school at 7, grade 7 those years. Yeah, they might have been 11 or 12 when they left school. So they had to learn to adapt and become very resilient. And I think resilience is part of storytelling. If you can spin a good yarn, you won't get bashed by the bully. And I think that's the way it is. If you are keen to entertain, people will give you a cup of tea or they'll give you bread and jam and cream on homemade bread. Some of our best yarns are like now over a cup of tea. I don't drink alcohol. I just love a cup of tea.
So what sort of, you said you went to, did you say you went to uni? Did you say you studied?
Oh, that was much later. So I'm 73 now, apparently. I dangerously think I'm 38. And it probably was 10 years ago I got roped into going to do a crash course at UniSA here in Mount Gambier. And I thought just a 6-week course that might learn a little bit more about, well, storytelling and grasp of English, only to find out that it wasn't a crash course of 6 weeks. It was actually a 2-year uni course. And I signed up for it without realising, just sign here. And anyway, I embraced the challenge and the opportunity to continue with uni, and I never got a degree or anything. I wimped out when it came to maths and I wimped out when it came to computer skills. And no regrets whatsoever, because I went off and started my own business. I started Bush Repair, which was an environmental business, really based on what I learned at uni and with TAFE. And as money dwindled with the government not particularly supporting environmental remedies with bush repair, it sort of faded out gently. And I saw the light there that I had 12 people engaged with us on our crew. It was absolutely amazing. Many, many stories of being out bush at daylight, at dawn, and working all day out in the sticks with red-tailed black cockatoos and learning more about birds and digital mapping. So we learned so much, which gave me the edge to set up an educational situation where I changed things when it was got back to me to survive. Maybe some people in the world are bloody good survivors, and my dad was, and my grandfather was, and I am, and so are my sons. We're all bloody good survivors. So I reinvented myself into bush adventures. And that's where my calling for storytelling really came into place. Rather than work with a chainsaw or a bulldozer or with chemicals, it was more like storytelling was to enlighten and share stuff. I've worked with Costa, I've worked with South Aussie with Cozzy, ABC, Backroads, lots and lots of people have supported, encouraged and embarrassed me in many different ways. It's been great fun.
So tell me about what it is that you do with your business.
So Bush Adventures quite purely is I wait for people to come to me, and I meet them at the town jetty in Port Macdonald. Being a fisherman, it's always a good place to meet in town. So of course there's prior arrangements. They would have phoned through and said they'd like to do an environmental tour, and it's all good fun. Yeah, initial introductions, the town jetty, and then it's a tag along tour. So people will jump in their own cars, and it's always very convenient. I've realised that a long time ago that people have their cameras or their toddler in a child restraint. What do you call it? Baby seat, and they got their own drinking water. They got their hats, whatever they need. They got with them, because they might, even if they've flown into Mount Gambier and hired a car, they've got their own gadgets and their own support with them. It's only a 2-hour tour, and yet most people have learned so much in those 2 hours. And of course, me being a storyteller, sometimes it might be 2.5 hours, and it could drag on a bit. And no harm done. It's all good fun. So we'll go, first of all, to the Enchanted Forest, just up the road, about 2 kilometres away. And I think it's one of the most gorgeous places I've ever been to. And I didn't initially have it in mind, but other people said, could we please include the tour into the Enchanted Forest? So I started doing it, and now it's absolutely essential. I think everybody insists on, hey, can you take us to the Enchanted Forest? So when we go in there, I welcome our guests in language. Marto Karu, Nara Nine Ken, Wormerni Nerpa, Nergul Thurgul, Walanda Tiniap, Walanda Kaba, Walanda Laplap. So what I said there in Australian, not necessarily in English, but in Australian, Martu Kara, which is basically good day. And we talk about Wormerani Nerpa, which is we're glad you've come. Because people travel from all over the world to come and do our tours, and they got no idea about some of the Australian way of life. Some are scared of koalas. Some are scared of snakes and spiders, and try to put their mind at ease. I really don't want to scare anybody. I really want to make sure that they enjoy learning and settle their curiosity. Well, some of those trees there are ancient, bloody old, 600 years, 700 years. There's one there in particular, the big old grandmother tree. She's about 800 years old. And the huge, old South Australian large-fruited blue gum. Eucalyptus leucoxylon megalocarpa. Now, the megalocarpa bit is the species. That means it's the large-fruited gum tree. These trees are so knobbly, and I often say to people, hold up your knobbly fingers and look at the sky. And they do, of course, and we hold up our knobbly fingers and we look at the sky. And I point out to them that that's the shape of our trees. About 1851, apparently, a cold climate southerly buster came through. You get them in Western Australia too. I think you call them cockeyed bobs over there. But we get the same thing here. Very rarely, like once in 50 years, we'll have one of these twisters come through. It's a cold tornado. And they come and bang and crash and rip all the top of the trees off. Just a narrow strip, might only be 1 kilometre wide or less. And it might only go for 10 minutes and rip through. So our trees at the Enchanted Forest suffered this twice. Very unlucky. 1851 and 1859, as the records show. And this is where we talk about our resilience. Modern day people can take a leaf out of the book of these beautiful gum trees and realise that this is our resilience. This is how we hang in there. You know, we make new growth. We have our roots firmly entrenched into the soil. We've got a strong trunk. We've got a strong family, strong friends. And just because we've been battered and bashed a little bit with our fingers and our hairdos a little bit upset, do we give up? No. We make sure that we can look after and foster our family and the new generation, the children come on. And that's exactly what's happened with our gum trees. They're so beautiful, those old trees. Well, this particular site is actually an ancient Boandik campsite. Realising and remembering that our country, up until about 1930, was knee-deep in water. It was successfully drained from about 1880 onwards with farming. And of course, it worked so well that we've now got a lowered water table. But if you were living in this country up until then, in that period, one of the downfalls was that if you're going to be walking knee deep or waist deep in water for most of your life, you'll be like sheep. You'll get foot rot and you're going to have a lot of trouble surviving. So our people developed what we call the red gum bark canoe. One of our most romantic family stories is about exactly that, about family. Family would live on these canoes. No need to come ashore, really, because all their hunting and gathering could be done from the canoe. You could lean over the side with a hook made out of abalone shell and some twine fishing line and catch bream and mulloway. And if you went out into the sea a bit, very easy to catch crayfish or snapper, jump over the side and catch abalone. But back on the shore, back in the waterways, which were knee deep or waist deep, absolutely paradise, because you'd put one of the kids up the front and tuck in underneath Dad's feet. Dad's up the front with a stick, going to spear anything that might be in a tree. Could be a goanna or a koala or a possum. Right at the very back be the other kid. Good idea to divide and conquer, I reckon, the little kids. In the middle, you've got the boys. The boys are the energetic ones, the ones that would be, if they could be, they've got the paddles and they're going to paddle the boat. That's their job. Dad would be yelling left, right, well, probably in Boandik. I don't know what they'd be saying, but the centre of excellence, though, was in the middle of that canoe. Well, these canoes are big. They're 20 foot long. Or what is it, 6 metres in modern day language. And over a metre wide, like they're as wide as a car in the middle on a bed of shell grit and clay. It's a beautiful little charcoal fire. Lots of benefits for that, keep the mosquitoes and the flies away. But the girls, the nieces and the aunties and the old fellas, the old ladies, they'd be there and they're teaching the young people how to cook. The boys, when it was the right time, they'd jump overboard to swim out to a swan's nest or an ibis or a duck's nest or a goose nest. Sustainable farming and agriculture was practiced. They would only take 1 or 2 eggs. There could be another 27 left behind for the ducks. They'd bring back some eggs. Of course, they've already got their kangaroos and they've got their fish on board, their shellfish or whatever. So they're going to do a cook-up, aren't they? And I think that would be a marvellous family survival. So for many years we had, many years, we had people surviving and living on their red gum bark canoes. Sometimes near the coast, the canoes were made out of reeds and rushes. And the reason was we didn't have red gums right to the very coast. And the idea of reeds and rushes canoes, a bit like the Tasmanian people, they could launch those canoes and travel through surf because they're virtually unsinkable. So same story, they live on the canoes until they need to come back to shore. Remembering that a lot of our country, probably for about 100 miles inland, was underwater. But every now and again there'd be a salty edge of a lake, and there'd be sandhills and somewhere dry for the family to come ashore and gather some firewood, light up and have a smoke. So smoked eels, smoked fish. So we have evidence that the flint tools were traded for sandstone grindstones. The smoked eels and the smoked fish and the live crayfish were traded far inland. There's even accounts in the late 1800s where some of our people were thanked by the farmers up in Glencoe, where they thanked the Aboriginal people, the Boandik, because they delivered live crayfish. It's a journey of 3 days and nights to walk with those crayfish. And I recently did a reenactment of that where I took live crayfish wrapped up in the beautiful red fluffy seaweed, wrapped up in bull kelp. And many thanks to Qantas, they flew me from Mount Gambier to Melbourne to Sydney. And I worked with Costa, and we did a little documentary film about the traditional storytelling of a live crayfish, because they could be kept alive in damp seaweed, and our people would walk probably 50 miles all the way to Glencoe to the farmers who rewarded them well. They'd probably give them sugar and flour and tobacco and grog, whatever they needed, they would get for these valuable crayfish. So some of our stories are very meaningful, right? To discover that it's actually written down was really delightful, because we hear these stories and they're handed on from generation to generation. But when you see it written down, incidentally by a Scottish lady, Christina Smith, she wrote a lot of these stories down in 1880, and it's quite funny when you read the written word. You can see it's obviously written by a Scottish lady, and I say it with great respect, because on my mum's side, the European side of our family, she comes from Scotland, from the Fergusons. So they go well. The Scots, they can tell some good yarns too.
It's in the blood on both sides.
I'd like to tell you about my family just a little bit. William Charles Westbury, you can look him up. He's one of the only Aboriginals from South Australia to go to the Boer War. He went over there and ran, whatever it was, 1890 or 1900, somewhere in there. And he came back, and after 3.5 years riding around Africa, they did all sorts of stuff with the Boer War. By the time World War I started up, he volunteered again, and he was quite experienced as a light horseman, and he volunteered into, probably thought they were going to have a picnic or a Christmas lunch with the Queen, I think. And they ended up in Gallipoli, of course, going through Egypt, and it's an amazing story, and you can probably share it there. I think I'll send it through to you if I haven't already. The War Memorial has got some fabulous stories about some of our returned servicemen, and William Charles Westbury, I wish I'd met him. I'd love to sit down and learn some of his stories, but there's 68 pages in the military records about his comings and going. He must have been a bit of a larrikin. He was a boxer. He was often expected to clean up the pub in Pinaroo at knock-off time, 6 o'clock closing. But he was also severely reprimanded for leaving his guns and ammunition. He went AWOL. I don't know what he did in England, but he went missing for 2 or 3 days. So a bit of a larrikin, I think. And a lot of our Australian storytellers err on the side of larrikinism, and I'm no exception. I think I've done some amazing things in a short life of 38 years, going on 73. I've written with my boys, my younger boys. I've got 4 sons and a couple of grandkids, but here in Port Macdonald, my boys and I, we've actually written 13 young readers' books, and they're available through Knowledge and Software and Mob in Queensland. I'll send you through the details if somebody wants to follow up on that. But it was during the Corona shutdown, talk about telling stories. I got really bored having been locked up. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't go shopping, and you could get a haircut. That was about all. So I started doodling and doing some drawings, and through the beauty of the internet, I started to share some of those drawings with some close friends, and some of them encouraged me. They said, your drawing's not too bad. You should consider doing an art exhibition. I said, well, I laughed and said, an arts exhibition during the Corona shutdown. That'd be a joke. Who's going to turn up? Well, coincidentally, a fortnight later, I had a phone call from this fella in Queensland who said, we needed somebody to write some stories, and do you know anybody who could illustrate? I said, pick me. I'd love to illustrate some children's books. And the first one was growing up on Boandik Country. The second one was about my story as a fisheries officer and fishing. And my favourite story is the most recent one about Robbie the Red Rubber Boot. So that's been a wonderful outlet. If anybody's ever interested in storytelling, please consider writing it on paper and submitting it to a publisher. To have 13 books written, and I've got more to come yet, they are so pleased with their simple short stories. And I think my editor or critique, she must have the sharpest pair of scissors and the most cruel red pen, and she prunes my pages and pages of stuff down, like now, back to what really matters. So having written those 13 books has been an opportunity to learn a little bit more about storytelling, chronological. I do like to tell the story in a chronological order. I don't appreciate my brain being jumped and jerked and here and to and fro. Nagaram's drowned forest is the ancestors of the enchanted forest. Not very far away from the enchanted forest, on the beach where we walk. Long time ago, out into where the sea is now, was an evergreen forest of big old gum trees and blackwoods and big banksias, big trees so big you couldn't fit your arm around them. One day, Nagaram, the boss of this country, wandered down there admiring his trees, his woodland and his open grassland. He looked out south to where the beautiful trees were, and he noticed there was two strangers, two ladies, up in his trees picking some fruit or something. "Who goes there?" he cried. Well, in Boandik, of course, it wouldn't have been as simple as that. "Oh, we're just gathering some fruit and some flowers for our children to take." "No worries about that. You did not get permission." And as we know with a lot of Aboriginal stories all around Australia, in fact, probably all over the world, severe reprimand if somebody steps out of line or steps over that line in the sand. A grumpy old bugger, he sat down and he called in the sea. When I first heard that story from my family, I thought, well, you're stretching a little bit. That's really an unusual thing to do, to change the sea level. As it turns out, there's 17 other similar stories all around Australia where the sea level has lifted. And when we fished, we understood that we could fish out to 60 fathoms. And recently, through UniSA and a few other places, I've discovered that the other stories are all similar. The sea actually rose 60 fathoms or 130 metres in modern day measures. And coincidentally, that's the edge of the continental shelf as far as we could fish. Little did we know that Dad and I and the other fishermen, we were actually setting our cray pots, so we thought, on simple caves. Those simple caves were actually the Boandik villages. We were setting cray pots on old art sites and villages and cave sites. I've spoken with Flinders Uni, some of the maritime archaeologists, and they're very, very keen nowadays with modern technology, more than sonar and more than echo sounders. They've now got underwater drones that they can send down and do an adventure investigation into these caves and see what's going on. I doubt very much if there's going to be any surviving cave art because it's probably grown over with coral. But there's certainly probably artefacts and campfires still there where Boandik people lived. Not actually all that far offshore, only about 5 miles out. We've got some of the most amazing cave systems and volcanic dolomite ridges. So that explains a little bit about how the water lifted 130 metres. Now, the poor old wobbly wombat, he's not going to be able to run fast enough to get away from a tsunami. The kangaroos and the emus, they're fine. They can gallop off and look over their shoulder and laugh. The echidna, he's going to have a lot of trouble getting away. So a bit like our modern day survival techniques, we do have to adapt. We cannot rest on our laurels and expect everything to be always the same. Echidna turned into keeler, the crayfish. And that sound is when we're speaking and teaching our language. A lot of our language is onomatopoeic, and that clapping sound is the sound that the crayfish makes when they escape over the reef, or even in our modern day craypots. That's the sound that they're making when they're flapping around. Survival. It's run, or you're going to be eaten by the octopus, or somebody's going to hunt you down. Now, the birds that were living in those beautiful big trees, the beautiful, beautiful parrots and the kookaburras and all the magpies and those lovely, lovely animals that were living in those big old trees, they did not want to leave their children behind. So they adapted to stay out there with their children. As the water level rose, the parrots became the most beautiful parrotfish. And the rock cods, they were also the budgerigars, and the other little birds adapted and become part of it. The two women who drowned, they become the sea lions and the seals. And on a cold, windy day, when the sun's shining, sometimes we'll be very fortunate enough to see one of those ladies laying on the beach like a mermaid, trying to get warm again, because they've been out there hunting and looking, trying to make up to that grumpy old fella. They've been out in amongst the kelp, looking, trying to find more gum and resin to repay him. So we now know that when we walk on the beach or we see a sea lion like a mermaid laying in the warm sand, we don't disturb her. We make sure that she's got peace and she can stay there. So our sea level rise is really a lesson for our children. Don't steal from your community. Don't upset the boss. Salt water turns trees to stone. The branches will fall off your community. Never to have children or the next generation of your own. And to this very day, we can walk out amongst those trees down here at Port Macdonald. There's only 3 sites where we have the sunken forest, because what happened, the timber rotted away in amongst the sand and the limestone to be replaced by flint. We've got this beautiful orange or cream coloured flint flows into the karsts, and as over time goes by, the limestone and the sand erodes away, is leaving those most beautiful casts of these tree stumps. And nearby, often you'll see the branches where they've fallen down. Now, that was about 12,000 years ago. 5,000 years ago, we had Kanawinka, the land of tomorrow. That is the volcanic era, and quite enviable, our Boandik people, and next door neighbours, the Gondich Mara in the Victorian area. Those two mobs, enviably, they experienced the volcanic era. The people lived in our story up at Bellata, north of here by about 50 miles. And they were blessed. They could lay on the hot rocks or the warm sand. They didn't need to have any creature comforts other than their little humpies, and they could enjoy just sleeping on the ground. Lovely soft sand, warm. And there was the equivalent of geysers. There was fresh water bubbling out, little trickling creeks, and very, very hot rocks. So they could catch fish or crack an egg and cook on the hot rocks. Everything was lovely for many hundreds of years. Boandik people lived at Bellata. And one day, the Bittern, as we know it, as the Bunyip. Woom, woom, woom. Pulan the Bunyip warned the people that something was wrong. The ground started shaking, the rocks started rumbling, the trees started tumbling. And Aboriginal people are quite superstitious about such unusual events. I thought we should move. There's something wrong. Something's about to happen. So they gathered up their few belongings. They decided that they better head away from this noisy Bunyip. The Bunyip, he lived in the reeds and rushes, the freshwater creek. We now know it as the Australian bittern, and bittern's the bird that pretends he's not even there. He pretends he's a stick. He'll stand up with his nose in the air, and you almost walk on them before they'll fly away because they don't want to be moved from hunting yabbies or little fish. The Bunyip owns those reeds and rushes. And blackfellas enjoyed the idea of having such a warning because it meant that their kids wouldn't wander off and be gobbled up by the Bunyip, which actually we now know is the diprotodon also. The diprotodon is the massive big swamp cow. I don't think he really ate little kids, but they certainly ate pobblebonk frogs. Bonk, 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 bonk. And when the bonk, bonk stops, you know that the Bunyip has gobbled him up. So look out, kids. So off they went, and as they looked over their shoulder, bush, up she went. Up went the volcano. Crikey, that was lucky. So let's go down south. So they headed off down south to not very far from where I live. And this story is just such a beautiful story because kids love hearing it, and they'll sit there at because I teach at a lot of schools, and they'll sit there on their little mat down the front, and they're goggle-eyed and their mouths are open, listening to these stories about this big, dangerous Bunyip. So they settled down at Perrine. Same thing, only this time there was a beautiful swamp alongside a big hill, and in that swamp was a floating island. And on the floating island, the brolgas would nest, and the magpie geese would nest, and the ibis would nest. So there was opportunity to swim out there with the large kids or the boys, and they could gather, like we said earlier, they could gather the eggs and catch yabbies, and life was good. And they could cook the crayfish and abalone on the hot rocks this time because they're so close to the sea. All was good. Till one day, the ground started shaking, the rocks started rumbling, the trees started tumbling. And they'd heard the story before, handed down from generations. If you ever hear the Bunyip warning about something going wrong, you better pack up and you move. Well, they did, and of course they looked over their shoulder and whoosh, up she went. Yes, up she went. The volcano exploded. So they thought, well, let's head off north. So they went up to the next place is called Bunyip, and we know that they lived there happily ever after for many, many, many years until one day the water came up and upset that volcano area, and that exploded. And that one is what we now know as the Blue Lake there at Mount Gambier. So we've actually got 3 active volcanoes, or they're considered dormant now. But those volcanoes, the story about them has been quite heralded and respected by scientists because they're so happy that only 5,000 years ago our stories were told, and it links exactly with the storytelling of those volcanoes.
Sounds like what you've done is you've got these ancestral stories that you're working with, but you're also working with science and evidence of things that have happened in geological time and things like that, which is really quite exciting that you've got one foot in each camp in many ways. Sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say too that we share our storytelling. Often people will add more to our stories, and I think that's the beauty of sharing storytelling, is that we're ever keen to hear more stories, and we don't know it all, and that would be a damn shame if we squashed contributors. That's what I'm trying. So yeah, and little kids will come up to you, "Hey, yeah, Dad's got a story, or Grandpa had a story about that," and it's so lovely to be in a classroom with 20 or 30 kids, and when I take along all my goanna skins and artifacts and stuff, we pass it around the room, and the kids, of course, they put the shell up to their ear and they can listen to the ocean. Even when we're 20 miles inland, the kids can hear that ocean, and it's such a lovely thing. But I work with early learning centres, like kids as young as 3-year-old, right up to university students. I also work out the prison at times, and it's just so lovely to have many joyous faces involved in our stories. It's not just about me. I love the fact that they join in as well and sharing stories, and I'm learning every day about their stories. So stories to be shared, and I think that's the wonderful part about communicating and being open-minded to listen to other people's stories as well.
Well, I guess, I mean, one of the questions I get from a lot of the international guests is, do I, Alyssa, do I tell Aboriginal stories? And I say, well, no, I don't tell First Nation stories. But I guess a lot of people are asking questions around that. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very privileged to have had probably an accumulation of hundreds of years of families and friends telling our Aboriginal stories. And as I said earlier, some of it was written down, but a lot of it wasn't, of course. Cave art tells a story. Artifacts tell a story. Scar trees tell us more. The canoe trees tell us lots more. And it's a bit like a jigsaw, I suppose. What's that other saying? In life, we don't get the full picture until the end. Then they give us the lid, and we look at the picture on the lid of the coffin, sort of thing. So stories are really meant for a reason. They're not just for entertainment. I think it's fair to say most Aboriginal stories, as far as I see it, they're a lesson in life. And to be part of the oldest continual culture on the planet, it could be said, we didn't invent the wheel, or we didn't invent the calculator, or we didn't have computers. Yeah, well, as it turns out, we probably didn't need to, because we didn't go so far as to overfish or overpopulate or over ruin the resources. As it turns out, as primitive as blackfellas may be viewed and negated sometimes, it turns out that sustainable farming, sustainable fisheries and sustainable wildlife management actually fits into our storytelling. The oldest culture with the oldest storytellers retained and managed wildlife in a sustainable manner better than we have in the last 200 years. So storytelling is actually fisheries management. And it worked, and it's still working. So a lot of modern day fisheries managers are realising now, like you talk about coal burns with bushfires, and we talk about bag limits and size limits and seasonal restrictions and quotas, and it all exactly the same. It's just different terminology. If we were to have overfished or hunted too much, we as Aboriginal people, up until probably 200 years ago, I don't think we could say that Aboriginal people were responsible for any species extinction, and yet they tell us globally that Australia's got the highest record of species extinction in numbers. I'm not going to go into doom and gloom and negate modern day living, of course, because I think we're very fortunate where we live now. But there is something to be said about storytelling towards wildlife management and sustainability.
Mm. So, I mean, the work that you're doing is, I guess, a form of environmentalism, really, isn't it? It's talking about the land, it's talking about the flora and fauna, talking about connection to country, connection to land as well. So it's really bringing an authentic way
It's a
of
real
being in the world.
perspective. It actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
exactly what you said, it's connection to country.
Mm.
We really take our boots off and we walk on our excursions. I often encourage people to take their boots off and walk on that soft sand and feel the trickle of the babbling brook around their feet, or walk in the shallows of the ocean with the fish and the seashells and the seaweed. And we listen to the wind and we're connected to country. And once people from all walks of life are connected to country, it's a no-brainer. They care for country. We celebrate our spirituality when we're out there and we're listening to the she oaks whispering, because our country is the people of the reeds and rushes and the green she oaks. The spirits are talking to us through the she oaks. We foster friends and family. We sit around in a circle, whether it be a fire or sitting around a plant or a rock. And we'll swap stories and we'll sit around and we enjoy inclusion of friends and family. It's also very much true that we should celebrate our achievements. And that could be the thrill of the hunt, catching some fish, or sharing a goanna or a kangaroo on the campfire, or prawns on the barbie, whatever it could be. And I used to think, well, this is all very good. And in the beginning of it all, we must respect the old country, the red dirt, the beautiful round pebbles and those big old gum trees and the beautiful blue mountains. We respect where we were, the beautiful blue sky or those clouds coming over. And I used to think, well, that's all very lovely, but there was something niggling and nagging in the background. I thought, well, this is not complete. There was something missing. Yes, art, song and dance and ceremony, that was the culmination of enjoying culture. We often hear about the great measure of culture anywhere in the world, whether it be France or Italy or wherever, it could be Egypt, is the culmination of a true civilization is in art. It could be music or paintings or just loveliness of food. And I worked out there was something beyond that. And an old fella said to me one day about it, what is missing in your stories is one thing called trust. So as it explained to me, trust is trust your own judgment, trust your own gut feeling, trust that the car's going to start, or trust that we won't be flooded next week, or trust that the bushfire won't take us out, trust that there'll be some fish in that creek, trust that we can catch crayfish. We put a hell of a lot of trust in our sustainability, a hell of a lot of trust in our planet. I trust that one day we'll have a solution for all this ridiculous pollution of plastic in our oceans. I trust one day that our kids will grow up and have a delightful life like we had. It may not be quite the same. We've got AI, we've got technology, we've got computers, we've got all sorts of modern technology. We've got electric cars, we've got stuff coming at us like you wouldn't believe. But if we trust that the future people can manage it in a sustainable way like we have for thousands of years, we'll still be here a lot longer yet. And I describe myself as a dangerous optimist. Let's hope we can make it work.
Absolutely. So what's the role of story then in this future of trust?
Yeah, well, I think it's exactly that. If we can instill into our next generation how they listen to stories and they create their own stories. Like it's been said for a long time that, oh, the old characters are gone. Well, not really, because I think sometimes people skip a generation. It could be a grandchild or a great-grandchild who develops the art of storytelling. Not everybody's a storyteller, we know that. Not everybody's shy, not everybody's bold, not everybody's got good memory. Not everybody can tell a story without reading it. Not everybody is a storyteller, but those clever men or clever women or the clever kids that can remember the rules or remember what could go wrong or remember what could be a classical way of instilling enthusiasm and optimism. Because if we don't have optimism and if we don't have the dreams to keep alive, and if we don't have anything to look forward to, we're not even going to get out of bed. We're going to stay in bed till 10 o'clock, wander out and expect mum to give us a feed. Well, our most innovative people that I've discovered, they're the early birds. They're the ones that get out of bed early and go out and catch the fish or go out and go to work or slave away. It's the innovative, energetic ones that are the leaders. If we don't have energetic, responsible, loving, empathic leaders, we've got nothing to set an example for. We really need to set a strong, positive example. And I think storytelling does that. We look back at Red Riding Hood and some of those old fables. Some of those were bloody cruel stories, and I really don't like some of those stories. Whereas our Aboriginal stories, there's usually a happy ending. Like it might be that somebody gets severely reprimanded, but the outcome of almost all of our stories is the continuance of culture or the continuance of a community. And I believe storytelling is essential for the continuance of our communities.
Mm. Does that mean that you well, you said, telling new stories as well as old stories. Is it sort of bringing the old into with the new? Is that part of the way you're thinking about the continuation?
Yeah. See, my boys, they're the younger ones. They're 13 and 11, and they're often out with me doing guided tours and walks, and privately we just go off and we visit Scorpion Hill sometimes, or we go down to the creek where we catch fish, or we might lose a rubber boot in the ocean. So a lot of these stories are coming from my children now, the 13-year-old and 11-year-old. Maybe it's rubbing off a bit. Maybe that they are dangerous optimists, and they'll come back with some amazing stories. And a couple of those stories have already been written into books. So the next generation of storytellers will be telling their current story with snippets and ideas from us old fellas. Mm-hmm. They'll adapt the storytelling to suit their generation.
Mm. So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. What do you think is at the heart of storytelling?
I believe the heart of storytelling for me is about giving hope, giving the next generation in particular hope. Our current generation, we're okay. We've survived so long, and we get some grumpy old buggers that say, oh, the kids today won't do this, the kids today won't do that. Well, we're very sorry about that. You can be sad and grumpy about that, but you can't change what was going to happen. It's up to the next generation to embrace and enjoy. So the heart of storytelling, I see it, is to encourage our kids and our nieces and nephews and our grandchildren, have a crack at it, have a go. And the more we listen, the more we learn. Kids read books, they pick up some wonderful ideas of reading other authors, and eventually our kids will come up with their own stories, and they're bloody beautiful. I love my kids' stories.
Mm. They are lovely. So just in terms of, just to circle back again, if somebody wants to tell, say that they've found a story, it's a First Nations story, and they feel like they want to tell it, who should they go to check if it's okay? And is it okay for them to tell those stories?
Very tricky. Yeah, it is very tricky. Apparently, and it's not my idea, because I think we can vary that opportunity. So providing we don't pretend that it is an old story, that it's written down or not written down, providing it is a family story or it's based on truth somewhere, it is acceptable. Some Aboriginal communities, rightfully so, really do not want their old stories modified or changed in any way. And that is probably the rules. If it's been written down before, we should recount that story, if at all, exactly the same way. Well, that's not always the case, because some people have a slightly different version. I think in our own family, the same story could be 3 or 4 different ways, and that may be in conflict to Auntie Mary down the road. Like her account could be totally different. So the rule is that only Aboriginal people of an area can tell the local area stories, and that's a bit limiting. So my advice to other people who have their own stories to tell, go for it. If they make it quite clear in the beginning that it's their own story or their creation, whether it be fictional, go for it. But I think it's very important that they make it quite clear that it's not copying an old Aboriginal story. Leave that for the old people and what has already been written down.
Thank you. That's really good advice, and hopefully it will answer some of the questions that people have asked me about that particular issue. You've been incredible. I've learned a lot from you today, Ken. And so where can people find out about you and the work that you do?
Well, only recently, the South Australian Tourism Commission have helped me by setting up a thing called a website. And for many years, I've been struggling with Facebook. So Facebook has got a lot of our stories on it. Pictorial. I love the idea that we can put up reels and little videos and lots of still photos. So you can find me on Facebook, Bush Adventures. And then on the thing called a website, it's www.bushadventures.com.au. And that saves me a lot of repetitive stuff. I love storytelling, but tell the same story over and over. It's all on a website nowadays, so people can also buy the books online. I get $1 a copy, I think, which is not much, but they get it from Knowledge and Software in Brisbane. I can send you through the connection for that, and you can put
all
it
right.
up.
I'll put it in the information
copy
section.
and paste.
Yeah.
Was it flick me a link? I love that saying. Flick me a link.
We'll flick you a link. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely lovely, and I think
if you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee.com/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.